Grizzly bear attacks aren't just rare incidents, they're brutal clashes between humans and one of nature's fiercest predators. Triggered by territory, hunger, or sudden provocation, these encounters strike with terrifying speed. From a high-tech SUV crushed in Russia to a police crew facing a Kodiak in Alaska, these stories reveal one truth: no gear or training guarantees safety. In this video, we'll explore 6 chilling tales of bear attacks on humans, highlighting the unpredictable danger and the incredible resilience of those who survived. In the dense taiga forests of Ussuri Krai, a remote eastern region near the Chinese border, the year 2019 marked the beginning of a geological survey mission that would profoundly alter how regional authorities approached wildlife safety. This isolated expanse had long been shielded from major industrial development, its undulating terrain blanketed with ancient coniferous and hardwood trees that had silently borne witness to centuries of migratory wildlife behavior. Dr. Maxim Volkov led a highly specialized geological team assigned to assess mineral potential for a government-backed resource extraction initiative. His team included 3 other seasoned professionals: geophysicist Anatoly Petrov, mining engineer Svetlana Kozlova, and environmental impact assessor Boris Grigoriev. They traveled in a heavily modified, military-style all-terrain vehicle outfitted with reinforced armor, impact-resistant glass, and advanced communication systems, all designed to withstand extreme environmental threats and potentially hostile encounters. Over 2 weeks, the team systematically surveyed large tracts of rugged terrain, deploying ground-penetrating radar and rotary core drilling rigs to analyze subsurface mineral composition. The local wildlife, while ever present, generally avoided the noise and motion of human activity. Common sightings included red deer, wild boar, and other fauna maintaining a safe distance. Though the region was known to support a population of large brown bears, close encounters were considered unlikely due to the scale and constant movement of their equipment. On the 15th of September, the team established a drilling station on what appeared to be an unremarkable ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Geological indicators were promising, and despite the hour nearing late afternoon, Dr. Volkov authorized a deeper round of core sampling. The powerful diesel drill pierced layers of compacted soil and ancient rock, emitting a persistent mechanical whine that echoed across the silent forest canopy. Unbeknownst to the team, the drilling activity was occurring directly above a natural cave formation, which served as a denning site for a large male brown bear. The vibrations generated by the machinery disturbed the animal from its pre-hibernation lethargy, agitating it into a heightened state of territorial aggression. Without warning, the bear emerged from the tree line. Its imposing frame, dark brown and muscular, moved with a forceful deliberation as it oriented itself toward the disturbance. Weighing close to 400 kilograms and standing over 2 meters tall at the shoulder, the animal represented the peak of the taiga's predator hierarchy. Petrov was the first to notice the bear's approach and urgently alerted the others, prompting immediate evacuation toward the armored vehicle. In a frantic scramble, the team abandoned their drilling equipment and rushed toward the modified transport. Volkov reached the driver's seat first and hastily engaged the ignition system as the others crowded into the cabin. The engine ignited just as the bear arrived at the vehicle, immediately launching into a targeted assault on what it instinctively perceived as a threat within its territory. The animal's first strike shattered the headlight housing with a powerful blow of its paw. Despite the reinforced construction, the glass and casing yielded to the bear's strength. It then redirected its attention to the driver's side door, raking its claws across the seams between armored plates in a disturbingly methodical manner. The harsh metallic sound reverberated through the interior, instilling a chilling realization among the team. The structure they trusted for safety was now under calculated siege. Attempts to request assistance proved futile. Kozlova attempted to engage the vehicle's communication system, only to find that the bear's initial impact had severed the external antenna array. The team was now fully isolated, without any means to alert authorities or nearby stations to their predicament. As time progressed, the bear's behavior became increasingly focused. Instead of relying on brute force alone, it began to exploit specific vulnerabilities. It crawled beneath the chassis and began tearing at fuel lines and hydraulic systems with alarming precision. Inside the vehicle, the team listened helplessly as critical systems were destroyed just below their feet. The standoff stretched well into the night. The Bear maintained pressure on the vehicle, intermittently retreating into the forest only to return with renewed aggression. The team carefully rationed their limited emergency water and food supplies while taking shifts to remain alert, though exhaustion began to take hold. The psychological strain of the continuous threat was as intense as the physical danger itself. During one of the more violent attacks, Grigoriev suffered a mild concussion when unsecured gear inside the compartment was dislodged by the Bear's assault on the rear window. By morning, the vehicle's engine bay had been breached, leaking hydraulic fluid and coolant onto the ground below. Several sections of armor around the wheel wells had been partially torn away, leaving the undercarriage exposed. The team's confidence in the strength of their vehicle had eroded entirely. A second night of aggression followed. By this time, the Bear had learned to shift its weight and rhythm, rocking the vehicle back and forth in an attempt to destabilize it further. The suspension system, already compromised, began to emit worrying creaks and groans. Morale inside the cabin deteriorated sharply as the team grasped the extent of their vulnerability. The once imposing transport had become a prison surrounded by a relentless, intelligent predator. Relief came on the morning of the 17th. A helicopter, dispatched using the final known GPS coordinates from the team's earlier transmissions, identified the compromised vehicle and descended toward their location. The Bear, hearing the chopper's approach, retreated into the dense forest. Before disappearing from view, it struck one final blow to the vehicle's rear window, leaving deep gouges in the armored panel as a final act of dominance. The team was airlifted out with only minor physical injuries, but considerable emotional trauma. Their heavily fortified vehicle, designed for battlefield-level threats, had been methodically dismantled by a single determined Bear. A subsequent investigation determined that the drilling operation had been situated directly atop the Bear's established winter denning site, accounting for the unusually intense and prolonged aggression displayed during the encounter. As a direct result of this incident, new guidelines were swiftly enacted by regional authorities. All geological and exploratory operations were henceforth prohibited within several kilometers of known or suspected wildlife denning sites during late summer and autumn months. This policy shift acknowledged a difficult but unavoidable reality. Even the most advanced equipment offered little defense against the raw power and instinctual tenacity of the forest's top predator. In the vast and unforgiving wilderness of a remote Alaskan mountain region, where winter temperatures regularly fall below -40 degrees Celsius and sunlight becomes a fleeting resource, the year 2016 saw one of the most harrowing survival ordeals in modern trapping history. This harsh terrain, shaped by millennia of glacial activity and boundless boreal forest, had long sustained indigenous communities, well before fur traders arrived in the 18th century. By the modern era, only a few individuals remained willing to confront its perils in pursuit of a traditional livelihood. Noah Jensen was one of those individuals. After 12 years spent perfecting his skills as a wilderness trapper, he had developed a nearly instinctual ability to read the signs of animal movement and anticipate shifts in weather patterns. His knowledge was deeply rooted in family tradition, passed down from his grandfather, who had trapped these same valleys during the 1970s. Jensen's assigned territory stretched across nearly 50 square kilometers of untouched terrain. During the winter months, it could be reached only by snowmobile, while in the brief summer window, access was limited to hiking routes once the permafrost softened. On the 23rd of October, Jensen embarked on a routine inspection of his trap lines, which ran along a secluded creek system feeding into a larger river valley. This particular route was prized for its population of lynx, wolverine, and marten, species whose pelts could command high prices at regional fur markets. For 3 consecutive seasons, he had worked the area without incident, though signs of recent bear activity had increased as the local wildlife prepared for winter hibernation. The trap line itself consisted of dozens of meticulously placed snares and leg hold devices, each set according to established game trails that Jensen had documented over years of field work. Completing the full circuit typically required 2 days, with an overnight stop at a shelter cabin he had constructed near the midpoint of the route. That afternoon, while inspecting the northernmost section of his line, Jensen stumbled upon an old steel snare, one he had inadvertently left behind during a previous season. Concealed beneath a thick layer of dead leaves and early snow, the trap lay dormant until Jensen stepped directly into its loop. In an instant, the snare's heavy-gauge wire cinched tightly around his left ankle, its locking mechanism engaging with brutal efficiency. As he fell to the ground, the cold metal bit through his thick winter boot, cutting into the skin and tissue beneath. Attempts to free himself only tightened the grip. The realization set in quickly. He was immobilized, alone, and daylight was fading fast. With nighttime temperatures poised to plunge well below zero, Jensen knew the situation had escalated from inconvenience to life-threatening emergency. Though he carried essential survival gear, including a compact sleeping bag, fire-starting materials, and a basic emergency kit, the angle and position imposed by the snare made it nearly impossible to set up meaningful shelter. The terrain offered minimal cover, and his mobility was limited to inches. As dusk turned to night, the biting cold intensified, and Jensen's extremities began to stiffen from exposure. Through the long hours that followed, he worked systematically to free himself. He used his knife to probe the locking mechanism, despite the fact that his hands, wrapped in thick mittens, lacked the dexterity needed for fine motor work. The steel had grown so cold, it would cause instant frostbite upon contact with bare skin. With the added challenge of his injured leg and the threat of hypothermia setting in, each attempt at escape became more desperate and calculated. Around midnight, Jensen heard something that no wilderness trapper ever wants to hear while immobilized: the unmistakable rustling of heavy movement through nearby brush. His headlamp cut through the dark, illuminating the broad shape of a massive brown bear approaching his position. Whether drawn by the scent of blood from his wounded ankle or simply curious about the unnatural disturbance, the bear moved without hesitation or fear. This animal, likely a mature male, exhibited the calm, assured presence of an apex predator accustomed to asserting dominance over its range. Weighing in excess of 300 kilograms, it was both powerful and methodical. It ignored Jensen's shouts and gestures intended to scare it off. What followed was a swift and violent attack. The bear lunged forward, delivering a crushing blow to Jensen's torso with its front paw, sending him crashing backward into a small birch tree. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, likely broken ribs, compounded by the fact that the snare kept his leg anchored to the ground. Blood quickly soaked through his insulated jacket from deep claw marks across his chest and shoulder, staining the surrounding snow. The bear lunged again, this time aiming for his head. Forced to protect himself with his arms, Jensen deflected the bite and fought back with his knife. He managed to slash at the bear's snout and front legs, wounding the animal superficially. Its thick winter coat and muscular build absorbed most of the damage, but it hesitated, circling back rather than retreating entirely. The hours that followed became a test of human endurance. The bear alternated between pacing and renewed aggression, each time testing Jensen's limits. Whenever possible, Jensen slashed defensively with his blade, aiming at exposed areas. His movements were slow, weakened by blood loss and the extreme cold, yet his will to survive endured. As dawn finally broke, light returned to the frozen wilderness. The combination of adrenaline and a final surge of desperation allowed Jensen to manipulate the snare's lock with enough precision to release the cable. His ankle, now swollen and bleeding, was no longer tethered to the frozen ground. The timing was critical. The bear lunged again just as he rolled away, using downed logs and terrain features to place obstacles between himself and the attacker. The change in Jensen's mobility appeared to confuse the bear, which paused, giving him the opportunity to flee. Despite debilitating injuries, he began to move, crawling, then limping, then dragging himself in short bursts toward the direction of his snowmobile. Located 3 kilometers away, the journey became a test of endurance that pushed him beyond known physical limits. Upon reaching the snowmobile, Jensen started it on the second attempt. He rode through intense pain along the packed trail that would eventually lead to safety. He reached a small parking area where other trappers occasionally staged vehicles, and there he collapsed beside the machine. It was not until the following morning that other wilderness users found him unconscious, barely alive, but miraculously still breathing. Emergency responders were called, and he was airlifted to a regional medical center for treatment. Jensen's survival, remarkable in both its circumstances and outcome, became a topic of debate among wildlife experts and biologists. The event highlighted behavioral shifts in large predators during late autumn, when food scarcity and physiological changes drive erratic or bold conduct. His recovery involved multiple surgeries and a long rehabilitation period. And yet, in time, he returned to the trade he knew best, trapping in the far northern wilderness. But his relationship with the land had changed. It was no longer merely a backdrop to his work, but a force to be respected, feared, and deeply understood. In the rugged wilderness of a protected alpine region in Montana, where towering peaks rise above pristine valleys and grizzly bears roam freely across over 1 million acres of preserved habitat, the year 2021 witnessed a tragedy that would forever reshape how search and rescue operations approach wildlife encounters. This ecosystem, safeguarded for over a century, represents one of the last intact temperate wilderness zones in North America. Yet it also creates a complex interface between human recreation and apex predator territory. A regional county's search and rescue team had earned a strong reputation over 3 decades of mountain operations, responding to everything from routine hiking injuries to complex technical rescues involving ice climbing and avalanche recovery. Team leader Captain Sarah Mitchell commanded a volunteer force of 28 experienced outdoors people, including medical professionals, climbing instructors, and wilderness guides who contributed their skills to save lives in some of the most demanding terrain in the American West. On August 14th, the team received an emergency alert regarding Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a 62-year-old botanist affiliated with a Montana-based university. She had failed to return from a solo research expedition in a remote drainage system known for its isolation and rugged beauty. Hoffman's scientific work focused on alpine wildflower adaptation to climate change, and she was well known for venturing into inaccessible terrain to document rare plant specimens. The designated search area spanned nearly 20 square kilometers of dense forest, steep talus slopes, and meadows accessible only by narrow foot trails that passed through prime bear habitat. Wildlife officers had issued warnings about elevated bear activity in the region due to a particularly productive huckleberry season, which had concentrated multiple animals into smaller, overlapping areas. Jake Morgan, a seasoned rescue specialist with 15 years of field experience, led the ground team assigned to sweep the upper part of the creek drainage. His team included paramedic Lisa Chen, technical rescue expert David Kowalski, and communications coordinator Amanda Torres. All 4 carried bear deterrent spray and had undergone extensive training in wildlife encounter protocols specific to large predators. The team set out at dawn, following Hoffman's intended route toward high alpine meadows, where she had planned to gather data and images above the tree line. Radio contact with the base remained reliable as the group moved through lodgepole pine forest dense with signs of bear presence. Fresh scat, claw markings on tree bark, and disturbed underbrush all testified to recent activity. Around midday, the team came across Hoffman's backpack near a small stream. Its contents were scattered, suggesting it had been dropped in haste during flight. Her field notes and camera remained undisturbed, but key personal items such as food and scented toiletries were missing, an indication of likely animal involvement. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, Morgan radioed for additional support while the team expanded their search around the discovery site. The positioning of the backpack and its contents implied that Hoffman may have encountered a bear, fled the scene, and possibly been injured or incapacitated in the process. Tragically, the team was soon confronted by danger themselves. As Morgan approached a thick patch of berry bushes, likely a location where Hoffman had previously worked, a large female grizzly emerged from the brush with startling speed, charging from less than 10 meters away. Her massive frame closed the distance rapidly, catching Morgan off guard before he could deploy his deterrent spray. The force of the initial strike knocked Morgan to the ground. The bear's jaws clamped around his neck, while her full weight, estimated at over 150 kilograms, pinned him in place. Her claws tore into his torso and legs as she defended her territory with brutal efficiency. Chen and Kowalski reacted instantly. While Chen attempted to repel the bear using her spray, Torres called in an emergency helicopter request. A dense cloud of capsaicin briefly drove the bear off, but she remained highly agitated and protective. Moments later, the team spotted 2 bear cubs disappearing into nearby brush, confirming that the adult female's aggression stemmed from maternal instincts. Bears with cubs represent one of the most dangerous scenarios for humans in North American wilderness. In such situations, protective behavior overrides all other factors, and perceived threats are met with overwhelming force. To de-escalate the situation, Kowalski fired several warning flares into the air. The bright flashes and explosive reports finally persuaded the bear to retreat with her cubs into deeper cover. The encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes, yet the consequences were devastating. Morgan's injuries were critical and rapidly worsening. Chen's advanced medical training proved essential as she began emergency treatment on site. Morgan had sustained multiple deep puncture wounds to the neck and chest, and major blood vessels were compromised. Despite field stabilization efforts, his condition deteriorated quickly, while Torres coordinated the helicopter extraction to the nearest viable landing zone. The aircrew arrived within 30 minutes, but the trauma Morgan had endured was extensive. Though Chen and the flight team continued aggressive medical intervention, Morgan succumbed to blood loss before reaching the trauma center in Kalispell. Meanwhile, the search for Dr. Hoffman continued, now reinforced with additional ground teams, air support, trained search dogs, and experienced trackers. Despite these efforts, no trace of her was recovered. Wildlife experts later hypothesized that she had likely encountered the same defensive mother bear and suffered a fatal outcome, with remains possibly consumed or scattered by local scavengers. Morgan's death sent shockwaves through the state's tight-knit search and rescue community. He had been recognized as a devoted and skilled professional who had saved numerous lives throughout his career. His passing prompted an immediate review of wildlife safety protocols across regional response units, leading to revised procedures and mandatory bear spray certifications for all field personnel operating in predator-rich terrain. The incident underscored the unpredictable and often unforgiving nature of wilderness environments. Even the most experienced personnel, armed with training and equipment, are not immune to the dangers posed by territorial wildlife, especially during critical moments when survival decisions must be made in seconds. Morgan's sacrifice became a solemn reminder of the risks taken by those who dedicate themselves to the safety of others in some of nature's harshest arenas. On the remote shores of an island off the coast of Alaska, where massive brown bears reach sizes unmatched anywhere else on Earth, and salmon runs have sustained both human and wildlife populations for millennia, the year 2018 brought an encounter that would forever change how local fishermen approached their dangerous profession. This isolated archipelago, located over 200 miles southwest of the state's largest city, harbored the highest concentration of brown bears in North America, with individual animals often exceeding 600 kilograms during peak salmon season. The island's fishing industry had supported generations of hardy Alaskans since the late 18th century, when early settlers established communities around its rich natural resources. Its pristine rivers hosted renowned salmon runs that attracted both commercial fishermen and the massive bears that had evolved alongside these fish populations over thousands of years. Tom Ellis had spent 8 seasons fishing the island's remote streams, earning a reputation among local guides for locating productive fishing spots far beyond areas frequented by most anglers. His preferred territory included several unnamed creeks that flowed into a large inland lake, accessible only by float plane or by trekking through dense, rugged terrain. Ellis understood that successful fishing in this region required constant vigilance. With an estimated 3,000 brown bears concentrated along salmon-spawning streams during late summer, safety protocols were non-negotiable. He carried industrial-strength bear deterrent spray, kept his campsites meticulously clean, and stored all food in secure, wildlife-proof containers following best practices honed over years in the wilderness. On September 8th, Ellis set up camp beside a productive stream channel where silver salmon gathered before ascending to higher spawning grounds. Though the location offered excellent fishing, it required overnight camping in an area heavily used by bears, as evidenced by fresh tracks and scat. He pitched his tent on a gravel bar elevated above the water, positioning his camp for maximum visibility while placing his sealed food containers 50 meters downstream from where he slept. His day's fishing had been remarkably successful. Several large salmon were cleaned and prepared for preservation over his campfire. Late that night, around midnight, Ellis was awakened by the sound of a large animal moving purposefully through his camp. Peering through a small window in his tent, he saw a massive brown bear, likely the largest he had ever encountered, methodically dismantling his carefully arranged gear. The bear had already torn through his tackle box, scattering its contents in a clear search for anything with residual fish scent. Ellis estimated the animal's weight at over 500 kilograms. Its thick shoulders and distinctive head shape marked it as a mature male in peak condition. Realizing that remaining in the tent would not ensure safety, especially given the bear's strength and motivation, Ellis reached for the only available tool, a fillet knife. He braced for a confrontation that would test every survival skill he possessed. The bear noticed the movement and turned toward the tent. With startling speed, it charged. Ellis emerged just as the bear reached him, and the two collided in a chaotic struggle that carried them toward the stream bank. The initial impact slammed Ellis against a boulder, knocking the air from his lungs. The bear's claws tore across his chest and arms, breaking ribs and leaving deep lacerations. Despite the pain, adrenaline allowed Ellis to drive the knife into the bear's shoulder, the blade sinking several inches before hitting bone. Enraged, the bear retaliated, intensifying its assault. Ellis fought to maintain his grip on the knife while avoiding the powerful jaws that snapped within inches of his head. Blood from both man and animal stained the gravel as the fight continued. Though Ellis managed to land more blows, the bear's immense strength began to overwhelm him. Then, without warning, the bear withdrew. Whether due to the pain from its injuries or some other instinct, it turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Ellis severely wounded, but alive. At first light, Ellis assessed the full extent of his injuries. Deep claw marks, cracked ribs, and extensive bruising. His camp was destroyed, but his emergency beacon still worked. He activated it and was later evacuated by helicopter. Medical personnel at a nearby hospital were astonished by his survival. His injuries required significant surgical treatment, but he eventually made a full physical recovery. The psychological impact of the encounter, however, lingered far longer. The incident sparked renewed debate within Alaska's fishing community. With climate shifts and increased fishing pressure affecting salmon availability, some wildlife experts observed that bears were becoming more aggressive in their search for food, leading to more frequent and dangerous human-bear encounters. Authorities used Ellis's story as a case study, updating safety guidelines for those working in remote areas. Emphasis was placed on proper food storage, emergency preparedness, and avoiding high-risk locations during peak bear activity. Ellis's experience served as a stark reminder of the wilderness's unforgiving nature and the thin line between risk and survival. In the vast expanse of Alaska's northern frontier, where the Arctic Ocean meets frozen tundra and winter darkness stretches for months, the year 2020 brought a tragic encounter that underscored the growing crisis affecting both polar bears and the indigenous communities sharing their environment. A remote village with a population of around 300 had existed on an isolated barrier island for over a century, its Inupiaq residents maintaining subsistence lifestyles despite mounting pressures from climate shifts and expanding industrial development. This coastal settlement, situated along the Beaufort Sea, had experienced dramatic ecological changes in recent decades. Warming temperatures had reduced sea ice and disrupted wildlife migration patterns. The community's survival remained closely tied to traditional hunting cycles, bowhead whales, seals, and caribou, that had sustained their ancestors for generations. Mark Larson, a respected elder and seasoned hunter, had spent over 4 decades mastering the skills required for life in the Arctic. He learned from his grandfather and village elders, accumulating critical knowledge about weather systems, ice stability, and animal movement, skills essential for safe and effective hunting. On January 15th, Larson set out with his 24-year-old son, Eric, to check trap lines along the coast. Arctic foxes and occasional wolves provided valuable fur, which supported both traditional clothing needs and modest income. The temperature hovered near -35 degrees Celsius, and harsh wind chills posed serious frostbite risks with even brief exposure. Traveling by snowmobile, they followed well-worn routes along the sea ice edge, paths Mark had used for years. These pressure ridges offered shelter to small mammals and supported the broader Arctic food web. Their trap line extended nearly 15 kilometers, with carefully spaced sets based on generations of local knowledge. During their afternoon rounds, they found several traps sprung but empty, with nearby disturbances that suggested a large predator had passed through. Mark examined the tracks and identified them as those of a polar bear. Such sightings had become more common. As sea ice receded, polar bears were spending more time on land, often near villages. Despite electric fencing and monitoring systems installed to deter them, some animals still entered human-occupied areas in search of food. While Mark worked on resetting a disturbed trap, kneeling in the snow, Eric maintained watch from their snowmobile roughly 30 meters away. Without warning, a large bear emerged from behind a pressure ridge, its white coat blending perfectly with the surroundings. It charged with incredible speed. The bear struck Mark with full force, knocking him to the frozen ground. Its jaws clamped onto his torso, while powerful claws tore through heavy outerwear. Eric saw the attack unfold and quickly recognized the grave danger. He fired his rifle into the air and shouted loudly to distract the animal. The noise momentarily interrupted the bear, which turned toward Eric in irritation. Undeterred, Eric continued firing warning shots and approached cautiously, trying to drive the animal away without resorting to lethal force, out of respect for its place in their culture and ecosystem. Mark's injuries were already severe, with extensive bleeding and tissue trauma visible in the snow. The bear resumed its assault, this time targeting Mark's head and neck. Despite Eric's continued deterrence efforts, the animal followed its natural instincts. Realizing that non-lethal tactics were failing, Eric tried to take a clean shot to protect his father. But the bear's position made this impossible without risking further harm to Mark. After sustained harassment from Eric, the bear eventually withdrew toward the sea ice. Though the danger had passed, it was too late. Despite Eric's use of emergency medical supplies from their survival kit, Mark succumbed to blood loss and trauma before help could arrive. Village response teams located them hours later, guided by Eric's emergency beacon and radio reports. They found Eric still standing guard beside his father's body, scanning the frozen horizon for signs of the bear's return. The loss of Mark Larson deeply affected the close-knit community. He was admired for his knowledge and mentorship, and his death served as a painful reminder of the increasing danger polar bears posed as their traditional habitats continued to vanish. Eric's first-hand account offered critical data to researchers studying human polar bear interactions, confirming a trend. Polar bears under ecological stress were approaching human settlements with increasing boldness and unpredictability. In response, the village renewed efforts to improve early warning systems and deterrent infrastructure. Mark's death became a symbol of the complex struggle Arctic communities face, caught between changing environmental realities and the traditions that have long sustained them in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. In the pristine wilderness of a remote island off the coast of Alaska, where massive brown bears dominate the ecosystem and salmon runs have sustained predator populations for millennia, the year 2017 brought a harrowing encounter that tested the resolve of law enforcement officers working in one of North America's most formidable wildlife habitats. This isolated archipelago, home to an estimated 3,000 brown bears, had long resisted human efforts to maintain order in a realm where nature's apex predators ruled unchallenged. State law enforcement agencies had received reports of unlawful hunting activities targeting the island's globally renowned bear population. Evidence suggested that organized groups were harvesting these animals for body parts highly valued on international black markets. A senior officer, Sergeant Michael Kowalski, led a 4-person investigative team tasked with collecting evidence and apprehending suspects operating in areas accessible only by boat or float plane. Kowalski's team included Detective James Richardson, a 15-year veteran with extensive experience in wildlife crime, Officer David Chen, a newly certified officer eager to prove himself under difficult field conditions, and Trooper Amanda Foster, whose expertise in wilderness survival was critical for operations in the region's remote terrain. Their investigation brought them to a secluded salmon spawning stream deep in the island's interior, where illegal traps and firearms were suspected to be used by individuals seeking to exploit the bear's seasonal feeding habits. Local guides had reported discovering mutilated bear carcasses missing key parts, pointing toward commercial exploitation rather than traditional subsistence hunting practices. On August 26th, the team established a surveillance post above a narrow canyon where salmon clustered during upstream migration, creating ideal feeding conditions that drew large numbers of bears. Though the site provided strong observation potential, it also placed the officers directly within one of the island's most active bear habitats during peak feeding season. The canyon funneled hundreds of silver and king salmon through pools and rapids, creating prime hunting grounds for the massive carnivores. Fresh signs indicated that multiple bears, including some exceptionally large males, visited the area regularly. Some of these bears were estimated to weigh over 600 kilograms during the salmon season. By midday, Richardson discovered the first concrete sign of illegal activity: wire snares placed along bear trails near the stream. These illegal traps showed signs of recent use, with trampled vegetation and bloodstains indicating a bear had likely been killed there within the past week. The team documented every detail, photographing the devices and collecting samples to support criminal charges. The process took hours of careful work, all conducted in an area teeming with wildlife and ripe for bear encounters. It was Foster who first noticed the presence of a massive brown bear, its dark figure emerging from thick alder growth across the stream. The animal exuded dominance, its size and demeanor marking it as one of the region's top-tier predators. Initially, the bear seemed indifferent to the presence of the humans nearby. It focused on the salmon-rich pools, offering the team hope they could complete their work and exit without provoking the animal. These bears typically avoided direct conflict with people unless threatened or guarding a valuable food source. The mood shifted suddenly. The animal detected the scent of blood and remains from the poaching site, triggering a powerful territorial reaction. Its posture changed. Aggression replaced disinterest. The massive predator advanced toward the officer's location, its movements deliberate and filled with intent. Kowalski instructed the team to retreat toward their boat, maintaining defensive spacing as they moved. Before they could reach safety, the bear launched into a full charge. The speed with which the 600-kilogram animal crossed uneven terrain was staggering, erasing any illusion of distance. As the bear closed in, Chen deployed his bear spray. The orange cloud of capsaicin struck the animal directly in the face, halting its charge temporarily. It shook its head violently. Disoriented, those few seconds gave the team a critical opportunity to reposition and ready their defenses, but the reprieve was short-lived. Seemingly enraged rather than deterred, the bear resumed its charge with renewed intensity. Foster moved behind their gear cache while Richardson unholstered his sidearm, uncertain whether a show of force would be enough to compel the bear to retreat. The bear struck Chen with terrifying power. A single swipe of its massive paw shredded his uniform and tore deep lacerations down his arm. He crumpled to the ground, the bear's spray canister flying from his grasp. Pain and shock rendered him unable to continue defending himself. Kowalski and Richardson responded instantly, launching emergency flares overhead while Foster activated the team's air horn. The blinding flashes and thunderous noise disrupted the bear's focus, finally convincing it to back away. It retreated slowly, pausing often to look back and posture aggressively. Chen's wounds were severe. Blood poured from his arm, threatening shock and possible fatal outcomes if not treated quickly. Foster's emergency medical skills were crucial in stabilizing his condition. Meanwhile, Kowalski coordinated a helicopter extraction from the nearest viable landing site. Chen was flown out and underwent multiple surgeries to repair torn muscles and arteries. Thanks to prompt intervention and expert care, he made a full recovery and returned to duty several months later, with a newfound respect for the power of the predators he had faced. The investigation yielded results. Authorities arrested 3 individuals connected to the illegal trafficking of bear parts, with evidence gathered at the stream supporting successful prosecutions. The incident also led to changes in wildlife enforcement procedures. Training programs were revised, placing greater emphasis on officer safety in predator-rich zones. Wildlife experts later studied the bear's behavior and concluded that the aggression stemmed from a combination of territorial instincts and the scent of other bear remains. The conditions created a scenario in which a naturally defensive animal perceived a threat worth confronting directly. The officer's experience became a key case study in specialized training courses, illustrating the delicate balance between fulfilling law enforcement responsibilities and recognizing that, in such ecosystems, humans are not at the top of the food chain. The incident underscored the unpredictable and often dangerous nature of fieldwork in wildlife enforcement. It remains a sobering reminder: those tasked with upholding the law in wild places must do so with constant awareness that their presence alone can alter the behavior of the animals they seek to protect, and that their own survival may depend on how quickly they can respond when those instincts are triggered.